Chair lays out as a matter of pending business Senate Bill 1057. And Senator Parker, you are recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Appreciate the opportunity to come before you this morning. I do have a committee substitute. We filed a non-council.
1 second. Senator Campbell sends up the committee substitute, Senate Bill 1057. You're recognized on the substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee substitute 1057 addresses a loophole in the Securities and Exchange Commission's Rule 14A8 that has made it too easy for small shareholders with special interest to force public companies into proposals and proxy materials requiring all shareholders to consider and fund them. This rule mandates that public companies present shareholder proposals alongside management's proposals, even when those proposals originate from shareholders with minimal financial stakes. The rule is a federal overlay on state laws governing shareholder meetings, but its thresholds for shareholder eligibility are strikingly low. $25,000 in stock if held for 1 year, $15,000 for 2 years, or just $2,000 for 3 years. These minimal requirements enable activist shareholders to advance their agendas at the expense of companies and the broader shareholder base. The committee substitute to 1057 addresses this issue by raising ownership requirements for shareholders seeking to introduce proposals at Texas-based public companies. Under this bill, shareholders must hold at least $1 million in voting securities or 3% of the corporation's voting stock for a minimum of 6 months prior to and through the shareholders' meeting. If these thresholds are not met, the proposal will not be eligible for a vote under Texas law, and the company will not be required to include in its proxy materials under SEC Rule 14A8. These higher requirements ensure that only shareholders with a significant financial stake in a company can actually introduce proposals, preventing the misuse of corporate resources on issues that do not reflect the priorities of most shareholders. The bill applies to corporations formed under Texas law with SEC-registered equity securities listed on a national exchange. These companies must either have their principal office in Texas or be listed on a Texas-based exchange approved by the state securities commissioner. Beyond ownership thresholds, the committee substitute for 1057 introduces a procedural requirement as well. Shareholders proposing resolutions must solicit proxies from at least 67% of shares entitled to vote. This ensures that any shareholder advancing a proposal bears the cost of outreach rather than relying on the company's proxy materials. Compared to the market capitalization of companies in the S&P 500 index today, the current SEC thresholds represent an almost negligible ownership percentage, just 0.00002%, or 0.02% at the lowest level. By contrast, the committee's substitute for 1057's $1 million requirement is 500 times higher for 1-year holders and 40 times higher for 3-year holders. The need for reform is especially evident amongst the largest corporations, which receive a disproportionate number of proposals under current SEC rules. Raising the ownership requirement would better align proposal privileges with financial investment, reducing frivolous submissions, while maintaining access for legitimate shareholder activists and potential hostile bidders. The committee substitute allows shareholders to aggregate holdings to meet the $1 million threshold, ensuring smaller investors can still submit proposals while filtering out those with minimal stakes and self-serving agendas. Encouraging shareholder coordination could lead to more thoughtful and widely supported proposals. By implementing these reforms, Texas corporations could achieve significant cost savings, while management and shareholder focus on this issue is also a matter to the majority. The bill could also serve as an incentive for more corporations to incorporate in Texas, reinforcing the state's pro-business environment. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my layout and happy to answer any questions.
Members' questions? Senator Johnson?
Is this constitutional?
1 second. There.
Absolutely, it's constitutional.
Preempt the federal government's ability to regulate matters of securities?
Well, again, look, at the end of the day, you know, the federal government obviously has the ability to address securities matters on their own. Obviously, the SEC, we're not getting in the way of the SEC, but we're putting in place our own rules here and guidelines in Texas, Senator Johnson.
This is, Okay.
We'll have some experts you want to talk to further about the
We
topic.
might need some experts. I also wanted to know: are there a bunch of corporations that are clamoring for this because they're so overwhelmed with the pesky shareholders asking them to vote on things electronically that no one votes on anyway because it's all done by proxy in a blink of an eye?
Senator, look, when we think about the big picture we're trying to do here, look, it's appropriate, obviously, for investors to be able to provide guidance to companies. But when you see these kinds of things constantly occurring and they don't represent the majority of the best interest of a shareholder, then something's wrong. The system's out of whack. And so the opportunity for Texas is to lead, right? I want to step back and say in all these bills, we have the ability to create the new, really, financial hub for the United States. We have the opportunity to give New York a real run for its money. Not only are we talking about the Texas Stock Exchange that everyone's so excited about, but we also now have very large public announcements from the New York Stock Exchange as well as from NASDAQ. And, frankly, they're looking for a regulatory environment and an opportunity that will be stronger for American investors and for American companies to allow management and board members to be able to really focus on core competency and focus on the core aspects of a business and not get caught up in all these frivolous proposals that are brought on a regular basis. But look forward to the debate and the discussion.
Do we run now a risk of having 50 states with 50 different sets of requirements for how you can propose a rule, all in possible conflict with the SEC's jurisdiction to govern these matters? Don't we have a patchwork? Don't we talk about that all the time, trying to make sure that cities don't regulate stuff because it will create a patchwork? We have exactly a patchwork right here. What if every state had its own stock exchange and every state had its own set of rules for shareholders? Then you'd have a real nightmare, wouldn't you?
Senator, look, with all due respect, Texas will lead. Other states in this country will not have the ability to create a stock exchange of the scale that we are. It's taken generations to be able to create the environment, the ecosystem, the regulatory environment, all the things that are so attractive about doing business in Texas and setting up an exchange. And of course, the SEC rules specifically authorize state law to establish alternate standards. And that's really what we're doing here. But no, I'm not concerned about a patchwork. I think that very clearly, once the Texas exchanges are up and running, I think you will see that they will drive a new standard for the country. And so I don't worry about a patchwork. I don't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a point of administration here, the left side of the dais, we got to get the microphones fixed during the break, but the right side's working, the left side you have to kind of single me with smoke and hands. Senator Colkhurst.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I think I know what you're trying to get at. $1 million, though. I mean, if you think about somebody that, gosh, they take $250,000 and they buy that. I don't know if we're squelching their voice or not.
My perspective, Senator, is that we're not. Again, keep in mind, it is $1 million, yes, but they have the ability to aggregate, meaning they can come together. You can pull together a group of like-minded shareholders to get to $1 million threshold pretty easily. And so that's why I think it's a very reasonable request that I think better sets or resets the balance between trying to always be responsive to the shareholder, but at the same time be able to focus on the core priorities of a business, right? But again, they can aggregate, Senator, so I want to make sure that's very clear that you can come together with a number of folks to get to your $1 million number.
Where did you get this idea from? Where did your bill come from?
Well, we've, of course, been working to try to study what's out there in the marketplace across the country, right? So you're seeing what is happening with regard to these incorporation structures in other states. You're looking at seeing what's happening, obviously, with the exchanges in New York and around the world. And so it's really based on what we're seeing happening in the United States and globally in financial markets and capital markets broadly that really have driven us to where we are at this point, to try to find a rebalancing.
And you landed on the $1 million just by research, or that's just a good feeling, $1 million, like?
Well, I mean, look, there's certainly, I think at the end of the day, we're trying to set a different standard, Senator, for Texas, right? We want to be the place where companies want to do business. So think about that for a moment, right? We want Texas companies to list on our exchanges. We want companies elsewhere in the country to list on our exchanges. And so we're trying to create an environment that makes it very attractive and that really separates us in a significant fashion from the way it's done elsewhere in the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Nichols, do you have questions? Very good.
I do.
Senator Campbell.
Just want to ask real quick, thank you so much. If shareholders want to aggregate, how do they reach each other? How do they reach?
Well, so that's a good question. Look, there are a lot of ways in which they can talk to one another, communicate. I'll let some of the experts talk about that in more detail. But, look, it's not uncommon that if you take a significant position in an organization, I mean, you could do that as a private entity with family members or friends that have a particular interest in a company. Think about that, Senator, that you know that who's involved in what stocks, who's invested in various companies. You could think about that just on, probably 5 or 10 household names. So, all of that, of course, is all publicly disclosed too. So there are opportunities for you to be able to communicate, but I'll let the experts speak to all the different ways. But aggregating, getting to $1 million, I think it should be a relatively easy thing to do for someone that's serious about bringing forward a proposal of substance to an organization.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Johnson.
So following up on two of my colleagues' questions, you mentioned aggregating to hit that $1 million threshold, 4, 5, 6 people. That's a couple $100,000 apiece. Do you need to have $200,000 in a company in order to be considered legitimate?
What I'm simply saying, Senator, is look, you could have someone that could have much less than 200,000 that would be in your pool that you would aggregate to get to $1 million, right? So you could have someone that has $5,000 of stock, and you have others that have larger pieces, and you come together to aggregate to $1 million. So again, if we weren't allowing the ability to aggregate, it'd be a different matter. But the fact that you're being able to aggregate, to me, I think provides balance.
And I appreciate Senator Campbell's question that it may be actually quite difficult, and it's quite easy to vote down a frivolous proposal. Meanwhile, Senator Colquitt asked you where this bill came from, and what I heard was it came from your head, not from companies who are clamoring, saying, "Wow, we're just so beleaguered with all these frivolous requests." Is that correct?
Well, what I'd say, Senator, is that it comes from
And we all
talking to industry.
No disrespect.
No, it comes from industry experts, right? The industry experts that have been doing all kinds of analysis and research, all the folks that are involved in creating these new exchanges and looking at feedback from companies of what would make Texas attractive. So there's real analytics and data beyond just me pulling something out of the air. Right? Okay. So it's an aggregate. It's a broader process of research and exploration and discovery to land on some of the structures that we put in place.
We do have some people here.
And we have several experts.
Final question, I promise. SEC Rule 14A-8. That's not a product of the New York Stock Exchange, right? That's from the Securities and Exchange Commission.
That's an SEC rule.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. We're going to open up public testimony. Bill Lauterbach from the Texas Stock Exchange Group Incorporated is here. Come shed some light. Welcome, Mr. Lauterbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bill Lauterbach, and I appear here today on behalf of TXSE Group, Inc., which is the parent company of what will soon be the Texas Stock Exchange. Senator Parker is going
Speak
to be
into the
laying
microphone. It's easier to hear you. Speak into the microphone. Bring it a little bit closer. Thank you.
How's that?
Perfect.
Senator Parker is going to be laying out 3 bills today in what he has labeled his capital markets package to encourage the creation of capital markets in Texas. Before I get into this bill, I think it's important to note that when the Texas Stock Exchange announced its plans to build an exchange last September, Senator Parker talked to us, and we was encouraged by his commitment to helping the governor build capital markets in Texas. Shortly after the session started, he introduced his capital markets package. Last month, on the 15th of February, the New York Stock Exchange announced they are opening a branch in Texas. And this morning, NASDAQ announced that they are opening a second headquarters in Texas. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because the capital markets see Texas as the next frontier for capital development in the United States. I'll be happy to respond to questions on this particular bill.
Why the 1 million?
1 million, I think we need to place in perspective with respect to the petitioning of a corporation's stockholders. Stocks are generally categorized in 3 categories. There's small cap stocks, mid cap stocks, and large cap stocks. And what we're talking about there is the capitalization of a company. So if you had a company that had 1 million shares and it was trading at $50 a share, your market cap would be $50 million. Small cap companies range from $250 million to $2 billion. At $1 million, that's less than 1% of the stock. In fact, it's 0.4% of the stock. In mid-cap companies range from $2 billion to $10 billion. $1 million is 0.05%, 0.05% of the total shares outstanding. Large caps, it's 0.01%, and the S&P 500, to be in the S&P 500, your capitalization has to be a minimum of $20.5 billion. $1 million is 0.0049%. So it's a very, very tiny fraction. There was a question regarding I'm sorry, I'm lost my train of thought. So the $1 million is a target number. We think it's quite fair.
Who came up with the $1 million idea to bring shareholder action?
In our discussions with former SEC commissioners, this is where it came up. The SEC rule, by the way, applies unless it conflicts with state law. And so the purpose of this legislation is to provide guidance as to shareholder initiatives that are taken
in Texas. Relative to New York, for instance.
Companies that are headquartered in Texas, registered incorporation in Texas, or registered in Texas and traded on a
and the belief
stock
would be
exchange
that companies would want to move to Texas or be benefited from a system that was more protective of frivolous actions by small shareholders.
That's correct.
Right. Other questions?
Study.
One second.
Go ahead.
Other questions, members? Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate your time. With that, we're going to close public testimony. Senate Bill 1057 pending. Chair lays out is Senate Bill 1058. Senator Parker, you're recognized. There is a committee substitute. Senator Campbell sends up the committee substitute. Senate Bill 1058. Senator Parker, you're recognized on the substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Appreciate the opportunity